There once was a big happy seed. She shook her maracas with glee. Opponents she smacked with a click and a clack, but I think she's high on some weed. Hey guys, James here with another game review, this time talking about the new Musou Warriors style game, Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity. Age of Calamity is a sort of prequel to the hit Zelda game, Breath of the Wild, but unlike that game, in this game you play as various epic heroes who hack and slash their way through massive armies. This is a Dynasty Warriors game in a Zelda skin, but it is supposedly canon, so for Zelda fans you can learn more about the great calamity which caused the world of Breath of the Wild. So without further ado, let's get into this review. So starting with the core gameplay, if you're unfamiliar with Musou style games, you play as various heroes whose attacks can sometimes wipe out 100 enemy soldiers at a time. The gameplay is the definition of hack and slash, as each character has a normal attack, a strong attack, and a special attack which you can charge up from killing enemies and then unleash. There are also many series of different combos you can perform by combining normal and strong attacks, which can help you add some variation and strategy to the fighting. A cool addition, for those familiar with Breath of the Wild, is also the inclusion of the various Sheikah Slate powers which can be used to strategically nullify opponents and blast through large groups easily. What's cool is that every character has their own unique takes on these Sheikah powers too, so as a result, every character feels quite unique. The game also allows you to use various elemental wands which can help to weaken enemies, allowing you to maximize your damage to them. Often, you'll face off against larger and stronger enemies. These guys can pack a punch and are sometimes just downright dangerous. You need to hack away at their health, and there's a mechanic in the game that encourages you to dodge and take advantage of the enemies when they're in a vulnerable state after attacks. After you chip away their defense meter, they can then become susceptible to weak point attacks which do massive amounts of damage and often will outright kill them. At its core, the combat is actually pretty fun, although it can be pretty mindless when you're not facing a larger enemy. Blasting through enemies can be really satisfying and definitely fulfills a power fantasy. They work hard to make every character different, and as a result, everyone feels unique and different to play. There are some characters who definitely seem a lot stronger than others, but overall, most are fairly usable. I found Link to be the most boring character overall, but even he has the ability to use 3 different weapon types which have different combos, so even Link can be really fun to play. The game works as a series of battle scenarios you have to play through. Depending on the mission, you'll choose which of the warriors you want to bring into battle. Then, when you're in, you're given objectives to complete. These are often things like capture these bases, attack these points, get to this point in the time limit, defeat these enemies in the time limit, defend these people or places, and more. There's actually an okay variety of objectives, and sometimes you actually need to be smart about how you complete these objectives, but as is the problem with Warriors games, it can still be quite mindless and repetitive a lot of the time. One thing I did enjoy is the battlefield management aspect of the game. You can only ever control one hero at a time, so in the meantime, you can order your other troops to travel to other key points on the map, and after you complete one objective, you can very easily and quickly switch to your other character to complete the other objectives. This can become really important, especially when you have to deal with time limits or survival objectives, and it also helps keep the pace of the game moving. One complaint I had though was that sometimes managing these commands and orders across different floors or levels of a stage was finicky and could be a little bit unresponsive. There are also a decent amount of secrets you can find on the battlefield, but I do wish the game would have allowed us to stay on the field after battles to look for secrets, rather than forcing us to have to replay levels to find them. I understand why this is the case, but to me this is a bit annoying to have to go through battles again to find secrets, especially when there's often time restraints on these levels. Again though, while the combat itself is pretty fun, the gameplay can feel a bit one note, as often you're just fighting a bunch of the same enemies. There are some variations of these enemies which can add a bit of different flair, but often they're just stronger versions of the same enemies you fought before. The stronger enemies can actually be pretty interesting though, and learning their movesets to counter them is important. However, one thing I noticed, especially with massive enemies like the Rock Talos, is that it can be a bit awkward to fight these guys because they're just so huge. Another thing which doesn't help is that when you're locking onto large enemies, the camera can actually get quite bad if you get near walls, making it quite annoying to fight in these scenarios. Additionally, and this is definitely one of the biggest issues with the game, there are quite a few frame rate and performance drops throughout the game. I feel like these issues were the most prominent in the first level, where it felt like it was almost persistent throughout. In later levels, it definitely improved, and I usually only noticed it when performing major attacks in crowded areas, but having those issues in the first level was definitely not a great first impression. Also of note, there are parts of the game where you get to control massive tank or destroyer-like creatures called the Divine Beasts, and these are probably the worst parts of the game. It can be cool destroying massive armies, but these often felt a bit slow and mindless. Not only that, but the control schemes for these beasts is often not great. Speaking of which, for whatever reason, I found the motion controls in this game to be pretty bad, whereas the motion controls for Breath of the Wild felt much more natural and useful. Outside of the major story battles, you also get brought to the map of Hyrule. On this map, various quests and challenges appear which you can engage in. The challenges are mini battles, often with quick objectives you need to complete, and they'll grant you some rewards. Quests, on the other hand, act as collection objectives you can complete. When you defeat enemies, earn rewards from battles and challenges, and buy materials from shops, you can spend them on quests which grant you different bonuses. There are quests which unlock stores and services, quests which upgrade your characters, and quests which grant you access to other abilities. The quests aren't particularly interesting and to me felt like a bit of a time sink. In order to complete some quests, you might need to grind levels or challenges in order to collect the material requirements. So, depending on how you feel about grinding, you may or may not enjoy trying to complete all of the quests. There's also a cool function of the Sheikah Slate which allows you to focus on specific quests. This will highlight parts of the map where you can collect the materials you need for the quest, making your life significantly easier. However, while it is fairly easy to go through the quest list, I do think there are some quality of life changes they could have made with the quest menu. Firstly, why doesn't it save after doing quests? I would often end my sessions going through quests, and it made me really sad to find out that I ended up wasting my time as the autosave didn't happen after completing quests. Next, I think there should have been more sort options for the quest menu. For example, they could have had a section which showed quests which we already had all the materials for. Otherwise, you end up doing a lot of back and forth trying to figure out which ones you can actually complete. And then finally, it became annoying when you would select your Sheikah Slate focus quests, as going into them would bring you all the way back to the top of the menu instead of back to the section you were browsing. Going back should really just bring you exactly where you were. It's kinda silly that it does otherwise. Due to the large amount of quests and challenges though, including a lot in the post-game, there's a lot of content here for players to get through, and you can beat the game while also barely scraping through a third of what the game has to offer. Overall though, there's probably over 50 hours of gameplay available here. Finally, from a gameplay perspective, I wanted to mention the weapon fusing and character leveling aspect of the game. To be honest, I'm not sure how much character leveling actually matters, as I ended up beating most missions under-leveled. As for the weapons, it can be a bit annoying to have to constantly manage the weapons, and a lot of the time it ends up depleting your money quite quickly. But this part of the gameplay was fine. It can be cool to upgrade your weapons and craft them the way you want, but I usually just ended up ignoring the bonuses the weapons granted. So now on to the other aspects of the game. The graphics definitely look good, and it's an art style that should age fairly well, but at the same time, I'm not sure I would say it blows me out of the water like it used to. They were definitely gorgeous for when Breath of the Wild came out, but aren't necessarily that special anymore as a result. Meanwhile, with regards to sound, there's a lot here to like, and a lot to dislike. Let's start with the good. Overall, I really enjoyed the music, although I wish there were more songs they would play in the overworld map. There were times where I felt like maybe the music didn't necessarily match the battle, but it was still enjoyable to hear overall, and they bring back plenty of variations on classic Zelda tunes. As for what I disliked, well, the voice acting left a lot to be desired. I'm not sure I would say it's awful, considering the quality of voice acting some games have, but it definitely was not great. I found battle speeches in particular to be a bit cringeworthy, and they didn't necessarily move me the way they should have. Some characters weren't bad at all, but overall, Nintendo needs to just step up their quality in this area. Finally, let's talk about the story. I'm going to try to keep this as spoiler-free as I can, but I will mention some of the big themes which come up, so if you don't want to hear any of that, skip this section. What I will say though is if you came into this game expecting to learn about the exact events that occurred before Breath of the Wild, I don't think you're going to find that in this game. So the story is shown through a series of cutscenes and narration, but the overall beats of the story didn't really have anything that interesting. Everything kind of just seemed like they were just going from this point to this point, fighting this battle and that battle. I guess I shouldn't have expected much more considering the genre of the game, but for me personally, this made the story a bit predictable and underwhelming. The inclusion of time travel made it a bit confusing, although I understand that maybe it was used to introduce more playable characters. However, this really just brings into question how everything works and what connection it actually has to Breath of the Wild. What you also find out is that essentially this world, while it does go through the Great Calamity, is actually an alternate universe from the one which we see in Breath of the Wild. As such, while we do get to see the large main beats of the Great Calamity, the results are quite different from what Zelda fans might have expected, and this is disappointing as the game seemed to be marketed as a direct prequel to Breath of the Wild. I understand why they might have done it this way if you think of this game as a standalone game, but considering the expectations, it definitely felt a bit weird. Overall though, I definitely did enjoy my time with Age of Calamity. I'm just not sure I can justify the $60 price tag. While there is a ton of content, the content can often be quite repetitive. For me personally, I would put this game at around the $30 to $40 range. I will say that I was definitely never bored while playing this game, but I think the actual content of the game makes it hard for me to say it was definitely worth $60. The core loop will likely not be engaging for everyone, and as a result, I can't really suggest it for everyone. If you're a huge Zelda fan and just gotta play every Zelda game, or you're a fan of warrior-style games, then by all means go for it. But even for fans of Breath of the Wild, I think you might be better off waiting for a sale or watching a playthrough instead. But hey, that's just me. If you've been playing Age of Calamity, let me know down below what you think of the game. I'd be happy to discuss and hear whatever your thoughts are. If you made it this far, I just want to say that I really appreciate you checking out this video. Please do consider liking and subscribing to my channel as it helps me grow and pushes me to make more and better videos. Otherwise, as usual, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.